Hello. If you have ever worked a job where someone had to stay behind so things would not fall apart, this is for you. I am recording this because I followed the rules for most of my career. The one time I did not, nothing went wrong right away. That part matters. What happened did not look like an emergency. It looked like everything was still working. This is not a warning. This is not a lesson. Before we start, I need to ask one small thing. Please subscribe or leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from. My name is Kline. I am a wilderness ranger with the United States Forest Service. I have served for 17 years. At the time of the incident, I was assigned to the Sawtooth National Recreation Area in central Idaho. My jurisdiction covered backcountry zones east of Stanley, including the White Cloud Corridor and the upper trail systems feeding into the Sawtooth Wilderness. This statement is being recorded because the rules failed, and because one of them was broken at Station 4. I work in places where rules exist not to prevent accidents, but to contain something that preys on human behavior. If you have never been to the Sawtooths, it is easy to misunderstand them. People see photographs, alpine lakes, granite ridges, clean air. They assume beauty means safety. They assume danger announces itself. It does not. Out there, isolation is normal. Silence is normal. You are expected to be alone for long periods. You are expected to operate without confirmation. That is why the stations exist. Stations are not buildings. They are not marked on public maps. They are designated locations where ranger presence stabilizes an area. Some are nothing more than a trail junction with a sight line. Some are radio checkpoints. Some exist only as instructions in a binder. Station 4 sat above a drainage that never quite froze in winter and never quite dried in summer. It was an overlap zone. We were told that without being told. I am saying this now because if I try to say it later, it will sound like justification. The first death tied to Station 4 happened before my transfer. His name was Caleb Moran. He was a seasonal ranger. It was 2009, late September. He disappeared during a routine overnight hold. His body was found 5 days later, less than a mile from where he was supposed to stay. No trauma, no exposure signs that made sense. The report said disorientation. The report said hypothermia. The report did not explain why his radio was logged as active until sunrise. When I arrived 3 years later, that name was already part of how people spoke. Not openly, not officially. But everyone knew the station had rules. I was trained by a senior ranger named Pete Halverson. He had been in the Sawtooth since the late 90s. He told me the rules the way you tell someone about weather patterns. No drama, no emphasis. Just facts you accept or you leave. Rule 1. You never rotate alone at Station 4. 2 in, 2 out. Rule 2. If one ranger cannot continue, both leave. No exceptions. Rule 3. If contact is lost, you do not attempt to restore it from inside the zone. He did not explain why. He did not have to. He showed me the log entries. Gaps. Corrections. Notes written in different hands correcting the same sentence. At the time, I believed rules could be fixed if broken. I believed mistakes could be undone. In the summer of 2023, I was lead ranger on a rotation covering stations 2 through 5. Staffing was thin. Fire season had pulled people south. Administration approved a compressed schedule. That approval matters. I need you to understand that. My partner on that rotation was Evan Brooks. He had 6 years in service. Former EMT. Solid judgment. Married. 1 kid. He was the kind of ranger you trust without thinking about it. The first anomaly happened 2 days before the violation. It was small. Administrative. A supply manifest showed Station 4 as covered for a period when we had not yet arrived. I flagged it. Dispatch said the system sometimes pre-fills based on projected movement. They told me it would correct itself. That was the first time I felt the need to correct something that had already been recorded. When we reached Station 4, the area was quiet. Too quiet in a way that is hard to define. Radios worked. Weather was stable. No tracks where there should have been some. No animal movement near the water. Evan joked about it. I did not laugh. We held position as required. We logged entry. We followed procedure. For the first 12 hours, nothing happened. Then Evan complained of a headache. He said it was nothing. Dehydration. Altitude. He wanted to rest for an hour, and then continue. Protocol said we should both leave. I knew that. He knew that. But the weather window was closing. If we left early, Station 5 would go uncovered. Dispatch had already assumed our presence. The system showed us green. This is the part that still matters. I believed we could fix it. I told Evan to stay put while I checked the ridgeline for signal interference. That is not allowed. Not there. Not ever. He did not argue. He trusted me. When I stepped out of sight, my radio logged a clean check-in. Timestamp intact. Station 4 remained active. When I returned 40 minutes later, Evan was gone. There were no tracks. No disturbed ground. His pack was still there. His radio was still transmitting an idle signal. Dispatch heard him breathe once. They said it sounded like wind. We searched until dark. We broke Rule 3. We called it in from inside the zone. Dispatch told us to hold. They said another unit was en route. That unit never arrived. By morning, the system showed Station 4 as fully staffed. I want to be clear about this. The entity did not appear. It did not announce itself. It did not need to. It did not act until the rule was knowingly broken. That is its limitation. It cannot move first. Everything that followed was procedural. Reports. Debriefs. Counseling sessions. Evan Brooks was listed as missing presumed deceased by the end of the week. His wife was told he likely wandered during a medical episode. She asked me if I stayed with him. I said yes. That lie is still active. Station 4 remains on the board. If you are listening to this and you work in a system with coverage assumptions, understand this. Once a rule is broken, it is not an error. It is a change of state. We did not leave something behind. We completed something. The search operation began at 0600 and ended before noon. That sentence will appear clean in the record. It will look efficient. It will look humane. In reality, it never started. By sunrise, Command had already decided the outcome. The justification was weather movement and resource allocation. The actual reason was simpler. Station 4 was still active. The system did not register absence. It registered continuity. When the helicopter crew checked in, they confirmed what dispatch already believed. No emergency signal. No active distress beacon. No deviation from expected ranger coverage. They were authorized for a flyover only. No landing. No insertion. Pete Halverson was on that call. I recognized his voice immediately. He asked one question and did not wait for the answer. Did you leave him alone? I did not respond fast enough. That silence mattered. After the flyover, we were ordered to rotate out. Evan Brooks was officially classified as missing. The language in the directive emphasized unknown cause and voluntary movement. That language closed doors. On the hike-out, my radio crackled once. Just once. Evan's call sign came through without a voice. No static. No background noise. Just carrier signal. I stopped. I did not answer. Rule 3 still applied even after the violation. I knew that now. Pete met me at the trailhead. He looked older than he had a week earlier. He did not ask how I was. He did not mention Evan's name. Station 4 is done with you, he said. That was the first time anyone spoke about it like a decision-maker. The debrief took 3 days. They asked the same questions in different ways. Why did you separate? Why did you not report immediately? Why did you assume coverage could be restored? I gave the approved answers. Fatigue. Judgment error. Competing priorities. What I did not say was that the moment I stepped away, something felt complete. Not wrong. Complete. I was placed on administrative leave pending evaluation. That was standard. What was not standard was the follow-up assignment. They reassigned me to records review. Records review is not a punishment. It is a containment role. You sit in a room with binders and digital archives, and you look for patterns that are not supposed to exist. You are not told what you are looking for. You are told when to stop. The first file I pulled involved a highway maintenance supervisor in Oregon. Different agency. Different environment. Same language. Station coverage assumed. Single worker left behind due to injury. Status remained green. The second involved a flood control engineer in Louisiana. Control gate left staffed by one operator during a storm. Relief delayed. Logs showed continuous oversight. Operator vanished during a routine check. Different regions. Different decades. Same failure point. Rules broken. State changed. Pete visited me on the second week. He brought coffee and did not sit down. It does not hunt, he said. It finalizes. That was all he offered. I asked him why the rules were incomplete. Why no one said what would happen. He looked at the binders, and then at me. Because if you know what happens, you try to fix it, and that makes it worse. During that assignment, my wife stopped sleeping. She would wake up and ask if I had checked the doors. She said she heard my radio at night. We did not own a radio. Our daughter stopped calling me Dad and started using my first name. She said it felt more accurate. That was the second loss. It did not involve death. It involved distance. 3 weeks into records review, I found a memo flagged restricted. It referenced Station 4 by designation only. No location. No description. It listed confirmed outcomes. 1. The entity cannot initiate interaction. 2. It cannot act without a conscious violation. 3. Once activated, correction attempts increase exposure. There was a fourth line that had been redacted. I asked my supervisor about it. He told me to stop reading old material. False stabilization came a month later. Incidents dropped. No new disappearances. No anomalies reported. Administration cited improved training and compliance. They brought me back to field duty. My first assignment was Station 2. Low risk. High visibility. Families on the trails. Everything normal. On the second night, a lost hiker approached our perimeter. Elderly. Confused, he asked for Evan Brooks. I told him no one by that name worked there. He apologized and said he must have read it somewhere official. That was when I understood the scale. The entity does not replace people. It replaces their status. Evan was no longer missing. He was complete. I reported the encounter. It was logged as stress response. 2 days later, Pete Halverson was found dead in his cabin. Heart failure. No signs of struggle. His radio was on, tuned to a channel no longer in use. At the funeral, his wife asked me if Pete had ever broken a rule. I said no. That was my third loss. After that, I stopped believing survival was the goal. Containment is not about stopping harm. It is about deciding where it lands. Station 4 is still staffed. It always will be. If you are listening to this and you manage people, understand this. When a system tells you someone is still there, it is not reassurance. It is a warning. I did not attend the internal review board that followed Pete Halverson's death. I was not invited. My name was still attached to Station 4 in a way that made administrators uncomfortable. Instead, I was reassigned again, this time to liaison duty with county search and rescue units. It was presented as a wellness-oriented move. Less isolation. More people. Fewer stations. That framing mattered. It suggested the problem was me. The first county briefing I attended was in Blaine County. Volunteer heavy, underfunded, good people. They ran through their procedures with pride. Mutual aid agreements, call-out thresholds, lost person behavior models. I listened and nodded, and did not interrupt. When they finished, I asked how they logged coverage when a team member had to step away. The room went quiet. One of the coordinators laughed and said they trusted their people to make judgment calls. That night, I drove home and sat in my truck for an hour before going inside. My daughter's bedroom light was on. She was reading. I stayed where I was because I was afraid that if I went in, something would finalize. That fear sounds irrational. It was not. By then, I understood the pattern. The entity does not punish ignorance. It waits for certainty. 2 weeks later, a call came in from a remote trailhead near the county line. A hiker had not returned. Solo. Experienced. Last known location overlapped a former ranger station decommissioned in the early 2000s. Not Station 4. Something older. Search and rescue requested Forest Service coordination. I was assigned as point of contact. When we arrived, the area felt wrong in a familiar way. Radios worked, but voices sounded delayed, like they had been spoken a second earlier. The volunteers joked about it. I did not. We established zones, teams of 2, clear check-ins. I emphasized that no one separated for any reason. Medical issues meant full withdrawal. No exceptions. They agreed. They always agree. 3 hours in, one of the volunteers twisted his ankle. Minor injury. He insisted he could stay while the others continued the grid. He was a retired firefighter. He knew how to manage pain. The team leader looked at me, waiting for confirmation. This was the low-action, high-tension moment that will never make it into a report. No threat, no sound, just a decision. I said no. We all pull back. The volunteer argued. He said time mattered. He said the missing hiker was probably still alive. I told him that rules exist to contain things that do not care about survival. He stared at me like I was speaking another language. We withdrew the entire team. The hiker was found the next day by a different unit. Deceased. Exposure. The volunteers blamed me. They said my rigidity cost a life. They were right, and they were wrong. That night, my radio turned on by itself. It was not tuned to any local frequency. A male voice spoke my name once. It sounded like Evan Brooks. It sounded tired. I did not respond. I powered the radio off and removed the battery. The next morning it was on again. I filed an equipment malfunction report. Logistics replaced the unit. The old one disappeared. At home, my wife asked me why I kept checking the coverage map on my phone. She said I did it while eating, while brushing my teeth, while lying in bed. I told her it was habit. She asked me if there was a station assigned to our house. That question ended something between us. Loss does not always arrive with an event. Sometimes it arrives with a sentence. The false stabilization ended quietly. A report came down from regional leadership. Multiple jurisdictions were experiencing discrepancies between personnel logs and physical presence, not just wilderness. Water treatment plants, substations, night shift security. The memo emphasized that no immediate threat was identified. They formed a task group. They asked for volunteers with field experience and records familiarity. I did not volunteer. I was assigned. The task group met in Boise. Windowless room. No devices allowed. They laid out case summaries without names. Patterns without conclusions. Every case involved a rule that had been knowingly broken for a compassionate reason. Fatigue. Injury. Family emergency. Coverage assumed temporary. Every case resulted in a status that did not revert. I asked if anyone had successfully corrected a violation. No one answered. One analyst said they believed the entity was a bookkeeping artifact, a glitch in how systems reconcile data across agencies. I asked them why the glitch spoke in familiar voices. They did not write that down. During that period, my daughter stopped coming home on time. She would text that she was safe, that she was with friends. Her location would show her at school when she was not. I followed the map once. I parked outside an empty building. Her phone showed her inside. I called her name. Nothing answered. When I turned to leave, she was behind me. She asked why I was scared. I told her because sometimes being listed as present is worse than being gone. She did not understand. She hugged me anyway. That night I dreamed of Station 4. It was larger than it should have been. Clean, fully staffed. Evan Brooks was there. Pete Halverson was there. They were filling out forms. They looked up and asked me to sign. I woke up crying. That is not something I had done since my first year in service. The next loss came without warning. A dispatcher named Maria Chen. 15 years on the job. She failed to escalate a missed check-in because the system showed green. The field tech she assumed was covered was found days later, alive, dehydrated. He said he had been talking to someone the whole time. Maria took her own life 2 weeks later. I am not allowed to describe that in detail. I will say this instead. Guilt persists beyond policy. After that, I requested reassignment away from operations. They denied it. They said my experience was critical. Critical does not mean valued. It means dangerous to lose. The entity began to test boundaries, not by acting, by waiting. I would receive emails confirming meetings that had already happened. Logs showing I had signed off on procedures I had never seen. My name appearing as present in rooms I had not entered. I stopped correcting the record. Every correction attempt increased the mismatch. The rule finality pressure axis became clear then. Once a violation finalizes a state, all systems align to preserve it. You cannot fix it. You can only choose where it applies. Station 4 was no longer a place. It was a condition. At the end of the 3rd month, the task group dissolved. Officially, there was insufficient evidence of a coordinated threat. Unofficially, too many departments were implicated. They issued a guidance document. Not a rule, a suggestion. Maintain redundancy. Avoid solo coverage. Trust the system. That last line was the most dangerous. I stopped trusting my own presence. I stopped trusting my reflection. When my wife said my name, I would pause before answering to make sure I was the one she meant. The entity did not need to speak anymore. It had learned patience. If you are listening to this and you are still early in your career, understand this. When a system tells you everything is accounted for, that is when you check who had to stay behind. I was no longer trusted with field autonomy. That is not how it was phrased. The memo said I was being protected from cumulative stress exposure. It cited duty of care. It referenced Maria Chen's death without naming it. It recommended structured oversight. What it meant was this. I was no longer allowed to be alone in places where rules mattered. They placed me on joint operations review. My job was to observe, to sit in on briefings, to audit compliance in real time, to be present without authority. Presence without authority is a dangerous position. The first operation under this assignment involved a hydroelectric maintenance crew in eastern Washington. Different terrain. Same logic. The facility ran 24-hour coverage, 2 technicians per shift, redundancy built into every layer. Until it was not. A technician named Lucas Rain reported chest pain mid-shift. Mild. Non-urgent. He asked to lie down in the control room while his partner finished the checklist. Dispatch logged the event. Medical was notified, but delayed due to distance. The partner did not want to shut down the turbine. That would trigger a cascade of reporting requirements. He believed the situation was temporary. He left Lucas in the control room. I was sitting in the observation booth when the log turned green. I stood up immediately. I told them to initiate shutdown. I said coverage was compromised. The supervisor asked me if I was ordering that action. I was not allowed to order anything. By the time medical arrived, Lucas Reen was gone. No sign of struggle. No indication of movement. His access card still logged him as present. The report concluded natural causes. I wrote a dissent. It was filed and ignored. That night, I received a voicemail from a number I did not recognize. It was Lucas. Or it sounded like him. He thanked me for noticing. I deleted the message. It reappeared. The entity was no longer subtle. It began to test emotional attachment directly. My wife asked me to take leave. She said she was afraid of what the job was doing to me. She said she felt like she was living with someone who was always halfway elsewhere. She was not wrong. I took 2 weeks. On the 3rd day of leave, my daughter did not come home from school. The school system showed her checked out. The attendance system showed her present in her last class. I drove to the school. They told me she had already been picked up. By me. The security footage showed a man who looked like me. Same jacket. Same posture. He signed her out. He did not look at the camera. I was still in the parking lot when my daughter called. She said she was at a friend's house. She said everything was fine. I did not ask where. That was the moment the entity crossed into family. I realized then that its limitation mattered more than its reach. It could not act unless a rule was knowingly broken. It could not initiate. But it could exploit assumptions made after. Someone had signed my daughter out because the system already believed I was there. Presence had been finalized somewhere else. I returned to work early. My wife did not stop me. The task group was reconvened quietly. Smaller. More senior. Less documentation. They brought in people from outside wilderness and infrastructure. Aviation. Maritime. Data centers. Every sector had an equivalent of Station 4, a place or role where coverage was assumed to be continuous and violations were normalized. We were not asked to stop the entity. We were asked to reduce exposure. The strategy was simple. Fewer rules. Less rigidity. If rules did not exist, they could not be broken. I argued against it. I said rules are not the problem. Correction attempts are. They asked me what I proposed. I said we needed to mark violations honestly and live with the absence. That was rejected. Absence triggers panic. Panic triggers scrutiny. Scrutiny reveals patterns. Patterns reveal the entity. We were not allowed to reveal it. The second high-impact set piece occurred at an airport maintenance hangar in Nevada. Overnight crew. 3 mechanics. 1 left early for a family emergency. The supervisor logged the departure correctly. The system did not accept it. The roster reverted. A 4th mechanic appeared on paper. No one questioned it because no one saw him. They found his tools arranged neatly at the end of the shift. Tools that belonged to a man who had retired 10 years earlier. That man's name was still active in a legacy system. The entity had used institutional memory as a body. I watched the footage of that hangar repeatedly. There was a moment where a shadow moved against the wall in a way that suggested purpose. Not speed. Not threat. Purpose. I stopped sleeping after that. The emotional erosion accelerated. I became paranoid about check-ins, about greetings, about being acknowledged. When someone said my name, I asked them to repeat it. When my wife texted that she loved me, I asked her to call instead. When my daughter hugged me, I checked the clock. I knew that if I ever stayed somewhere because I felt needed, because I felt loved, because I believed I could fix it, that would be enough. The entity waited for that belief. The next loss was institutional. A rural hospital closed an overnight wing after repeated staffing anomalies. Patients were transferred. 1 died during transport. The closure was blamed on funding. It was blamed on everything except the truth. I was asked to draft a guidance memo for field supervisors. Something neutral. Something calming. I wrote a document that emphasized this. Never assume coverage. Never leave someone behind. Never believe a violation can be undone. They edited out the last sentence. False stabilization returned. Reports slowed. Metrics improved. Leadership congratulated themselves. I began to receive fewer calls, fewer emails. My name appeared less often. I thought perhaps the entity was losing interest. Then I realized something worse. The entity does not escalate through action. It escalates through normalization. When violations become common enough, they stop being violations. They become baseline. That is when containment fails. The part of me that believed survival was possible finally gave up. I started keeping a private log, not digital. Paper. I wrote down every instance where presence was assumed without confirmation. The list grew faster than I could manage. One night, as I was writing, my radio turned on. Not my work radio. An old one I had boxed up. Evan Brooks spoke my name. He said it was time to rotate. I did not answer. If you are listening to this, understand this. The entity does not need to take you. It only needs to be acknowledged by the system once. After that, you are complete. I was no longer certain my presence was required for the entity to operate. That realization did not arrive as panic. It arrived as relief. If I was not essential, then my removal might reduce exposure. That was the logic I followed. It was flawed, but it was consistent. I requested a transfer to a non-operational role outside my region. I asked for a position that did not involve coverage oversight. Training, policy review, anything static. The request was denied within hours. The explanation cited my unique familiarity with cross-sector anomalies. They said continuity mattered. Continuity is another word the entity favors. I was ordered to attend a closed-door briefing with representatives from 3 federal agencies and 2 private infrastructure firms. The location was a leased office park outside Salt Lake City. Neutral ground. No identifying signage. The briefing opened with a statement of scope. They acknowledged a non-human adaptive intelligence. They avoided the word entity. They described it as a systemic exploit. They outlined what it was not. It was not a pathogen. It was not a cyber intrusion. It was not a psychological contagion. Then they outlined what it required. Human rules. Human compassion. Human duty. Emotional attachment. I did not interrupt. I had learned that interruption signals hope. They presented projections, not casualties, coverage. How many locations worldwide relied on assumed presence? How many roles normalized solo operation? How often rules were bent to keep systems running? The numbers were large. That mattered less than the trend line. One analyst asked whether the exploit could be starved by eliminating rules. Another asked whether automation could replace presence. I asked a different question. What happens when the system believes someone is present who is not? The room did not answer immediately. Finally, a senior official said the system behaves as if presence is true. I said no. The system behaves as if presence is complete. That distinction ended the discussion. The decision was made to pursue a containment doctrine focused on compartmentalization. Smaller systems, fewer interdependencies. Reduced transparency between departments. I argued that secrecy increases assumption. They argued that exposure increases panic. Panic increases violation. Violation increases finality. The logic closed on itself. After the briefing, a man from a private firm pulled me aside. He worked in data center operations. He said they had an overnight engineer who stopped answering messages but remained logged in for 3 days. The monitoring software showed normal activity. They eventually sent someone in. The chair was empty. The badge was still authenticated. He asked me if he should tell anyone. I told him to mark the absence honestly and accept the consequences. He said that would violate contract terms. I told him that contracts do not matter to something older than them. He did not laugh. When I returned home, my wife had packed a bag. She said she was taking our daughter to her sister's house for a while. She said she needed to know where I was at all times. I told her I could not guarantee that. She cried. I did not. That was the fourth loss. It involved family. It involved choice. It involved duty over attachment. The house felt wrong after they left. Not empty. Overcomplete. As if my presence filled more space than it should. I began to notice that my reflection lagged slightly when I moved. Not visually. Conceptually. Like my sense of self was trailing behind my actions. I stopped looking in mirrors. The entity escalated through paperwork. I received a performance evaluation that praised my leadership during incidents I had not attended. Commendations for decisions I had not made. My signature appeared on forms I had never seen. I attempted to correct one. Just one. I emailed my supervisor to clarify that I had not been present at a particular site visit. The reply thanked me for confirming my attendance. That was the moment I understood the limitation had shifted from external to internal. The entity could not act unless a rule was knowingly broken. But once the state was finalized, the system itself enforced continuity. I was no longer dealing with an outside intelligence. I was dealing with institutional gravity. The second emotional violation occurred because of compassion. A former colleague named Sarah called me late one night. She worked dispatch in another state. She said she was scared. She said her board showed full coverage, but she could not reach anyone. She asked me what to do. I told her to escalate. To break protocol. To call it in. She said that would get people in trouble. She said she did not want to hurt anyone. I hesitated. That hesitation mattered. By the time she escalated, the field unit had already been marked complete. 2 operators vanished. One was later found alive but changed. He refused to be alone. He slept in the break room with the lights on. He said the radio kept thanking him for staying. Sarah resigned. She moved back in with her parents. She stopped answering my calls. Guilt persisted. The next set piece unfolded in a place that should have been immune. A university research lab with strict access control, multiple redundancies. No solo work allowed. A graduate student stayed late to finish an experiment. Her advisor left early. He told her to lock up when she was done. That instruction was not allowed. The system showed 2 people present. The student was found the next morning sitting at her station. Alive. Unresponsive. She kept repeating that she had not wanted to waste the data. She never worked in a lab again. That case never reached us officially. I learned about it through a friend of a friend. Containment was already failing. I began to write this confession then, not to warn, to anchor myself. I needed a record that the system could not edit. Paper mattered again. I stored pages in different locations. I did not keep them together. One night, as I was writing, I realized I could not remember leaving the office. I was at my desk. Then, I was at home. There was no transition. The coverage map on my phone showed me active the entire time. I called my wife. She did not answer. I drove to her sister's house. The lights were on. My daughter was visible through the window. I did not go inside. I understood then that belief in fixability was the final trigger. If I went in believing I could restore something, I would finalize another state. The entity did not need to speak. It did not need to appear. It only needed me to choose hope. I stayed in the car until morning. The next day, I submitted my resignation. It was accepted instantly. Too instantly. My access was not revoked. My name remained on the board. That was when I realized resignation does not remove presence. It formalizes it. If you are listening to this, understand this. Leaving does not undo a violation. It completes it. I stayed alive by doing one thing. I stopped trying to fix anything. After my resignation, nothing changed. That was the first indication that resignation had not been an exit. It had been a classification. My credentials still worked. My email still received updates. My name remained in routing lists. I was no longer scheduled, but I was still counted. Presence without assignment. I contacted Human Resources. I told them I had resigned and that my access should be terminated. They apologized for the delay. They assured me it would be corrected. 2 days later, I received a calendar invite for a meeting I had not agreed to attend. The subject line read Operational Continuity Review. I did not go. The meeting minutes were circulated anyway. They listed me as present. I stopped trying to remove myself digitally. I understood now that correction attempts strengthened the assumption. The system was not malfunctioning. It was converging. I moved out of my house. I left most of my belongings behind. I rented a small room above a mechanic's shop in a town that did not appear on any of my previous coverage maps. I paid cash. I did not provide an address. I believed anonymity might starve the pattern. That belief lasted 4 days. On the 5th night, the shop owner knocked on my door. He said someone had come by asking for me. He said they wore a uniform he recognized, but could not name. I asked him what they wanted. He said they asked if I was still on duty. I did not answer. That night, my phone rang. No caller identification. When I answered, I heard breathing. Then my own voice thanked me for staying late. I powered the phone off and removed the battery. The next morning, it was on again. I began to understand the deeper rule. The entity does not need permission to persist. It needs permission to change state. Once finalized, persistence is automatic. I contacted one person I still trusted, a retired fire marshal named Glenn Rourke. He had been involved in a similar anomaly years earlier during a refinery incident. He had lost 3 people because he allowed one technician to remain behind to finish a safety check. Glenn met me at a diner off the interstate. He looked tired, older than his age. He told me he had tried to disappear too. It does not let go of people who understand it, he said. Understanding is a form of acknowledgement. He told me the only thing that slowed it was refusal to participate in assumptions. Never confirm presence. Never deny absence. Never correct records. Let the system rot around the gap. That strategy had a cost. Glenn had lost his pension, his marriage, his standing. He lived in a trailer on borrowed land. He said it was worth it. While we talked, the diner television displayed a news segment about a regional power outage, a substation failure, a technician unreachable but logged as on site. Glenn did not look at the screen. He said it always starts that way. After that meeting, I adopted his methods. I stopped responding to emails. I did not answer calls. I did not sign anything. I did not check in anywhere. For a short time, it worked. False stabilization returned again. My name appeared less frequently. My presence stopped being assumed in some systems. I was marked unavailable, not absent, unavailable. That distinction mattered. I thought I had found a way to exist in the negative space. Then my daughter called. She said she had dreamed about me. She said I was standing in her school hallway wearing my ranger jacket. She said I told her I was working late. She asked me if I had been there. I told her no. I broke the rule. I denied presence directly. The silence on the line lasted too long. She said the school administrator had told her the same thing. That I had signed her out early. That I had said it was important. I told her to stay where she was. I told her to call her mother. When I hung up, my phone displayed a missed call from an unknown number. The voicemail was my daughter's voice. She said, "Dad, you can go now. They said you already stayed." That was the moment the entity shifted from institutional to personal. It did not take her. It did not need to. It finalized a version of me in her world. I drove for hours. I did not know where I was going. I avoided towns. I avoided checkpoints. I avoided places where my presence could be recorded. I slept in my car. I dreamed of Station 4 again. This time it was empty. No staff. No equipment. Just a sign that read coverage maintained. When I woke up, there was a citation under my windshield wiper. Parking violation. Issued at a time when I had been asleep. My name was on it. I realized then that the entity was no longer reacting to violations. It was harvesting them, every act of compassion, every attempt to reassure, every denial. Each one created a new finalized state. The pressure axis had expanded. I began to think about the rule limitation differently. It cannot act unless a rule is knowingly broken. But rules are not always written. Some are relational. Some are implied. Some are inherited. I had broken a rule by answering my daughter honestly when the system required ambiguity. That knowledge hollowed me out. I contacted my wife. I told her I was sorry. I told her I should not have tried to explain things. I told her to stop asking where I was. She said she had already done that. She said it was easier to pretend I was always working. That was the fifth loss. Not disappearance. Acceptance. The entity thrives on acceptance. It does not want fear. Fear causes scrutiny. It wants quiet compliance. I began to document again. More carefully. Less narrative. Dates. Times. Systems involved. I noticed something new. In every case where the entity escalated beyond containment, someone tried to reassure another person. It was always framed as kindness. We have it covered. You can rest. I will stay. That phrase appears in more incident reports than any other. I returned to the Sawtooths once. I should not have. I needed to see Station 4 again. The trail was unchanged. The drainage still flowed. The air was still thin and clear. There was no marker, but my radio activated automatically when I crossed the boundary. A familiar voice greeted me. Not Evan, not Pete. It was mine. It said, "You can stand down now." I did not respond. I turned around and walked out without logging entry. That restraint saved me. Temporarily. When I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A notification. Coverage updated. Station 4 remained active. It always will. If you are listening to this, understand this. The most dangerous thing you can say in a system like this is, "I will stay so you can go." That sentence has never been undone. I had stopped believing distance mattered. Geography is useful to humans. It is not useful to systems. It is irrelevant to something that operates through assumption rather than movement. I stayed mobile anyway. Movement created gaps. Gaps created ambiguity. Ambiguity delayed finality. I drove secondary roads. I avoided tolls. I avoided places where my name might be required. When asked, I paid cash and used silence as identification. For a while, that was enough. The escalation returned through secondary perspective pressure, not through me. Through people who still believed the rules could protect them. A former trainee named Mark called me from a water treatment facility in the Midwest. He said they had lost contact with the night operator. He said the system showed normal parameters. He said the operator had a history of staying late to help. He asked me what to do. I told him to shut the plant down. He said that would leave the town without water pressure. He said there was a hospital on the line. He said the operator would be furious if they overreacted. I told him the operator was already gone. He asked me how I could be sure. I told him because the system said he was still there. Mark did not shut it down. The operator was found 2 days later in a maintenance corridor. Alive. Dehydrated. He had carved tally marks into the wall. He said he had been told to keep the pressure stable. The town never learned what almost happened. They never needed to. Mark resigned. That was another loss. Not mine, but mine to carry. I began to notice that the entity preferred critical infrastructure over wilderness now. Forests isolate individuals. Systems connect thousands. Containment in wilderness had always been about reducing exposure. Containment in infrastructure was about preventing cascade. The task group never officially reconvened, but we began to hear from each other anyway, quietly, off record. People who had seen the same pattern and chosen not to fix it. An air traffic supervisor from the Southwest, a maritime dispatcher from the Gulf, a server farm manager from Northern Europe. Different languages. Same phrases. Someone stayed behind. Coverage assumed. Status remained green. We began to share a single rule among ourselves. Never reassure. Never say you have it covered. We failed more often than we succeeded. The entity exploited emotional erosion. People get tired. People want to help. People want to be kind. Kindness is a vulnerability when rules exist to contain something else. I stopped using my name. That helped more than anything else. Names are anchors. Names allow systems to reconcile presence. Without one, I was harder to finalize. I still existed in some records. I always would. But new ones did not form as easily. That changed when my wife called again. She said our daughter had been asking questions. She said she wanted to know why everyone treated me like I was away on a long assignment. She said pretending had become routine. Routine is how violations become baseline. I told her not to explain anything. She said she could not keep lying. I told her truth was worse. She said she did not believe me. That disbelief saved her. The entity cannot exploit what is not acknowledged. That night, I watched the news in a motel room. A wildfire briefing. A ranger spokesperson stood at a podium. He used language I recognized. Calm. Reassuring. He said all stations were accounted for. I turned the television off. The next morning, 3 firefighters were reported missing. The spokesperson amended the statement. He said the situation was evolving. It always is. I realized then that my confession would eventually be necessary. Not as a warning, as an inoculation. People need language to resist assumption. Without it, they default to reassurance. I began recording this account shortly after. Not in one place. Not in order. Fragments that could not be reconciled into a single clean narrative by any one system. That is why you are hearing it this way. The entity noticed. It responded by increasing pressure indirectly. I was detained once for a minor traffic issue. The officer ran my information. He frowned at the screen. He asked me if I worked for the Forest Service. I said no. He said the system disagreed. I said the system was wrong. He let me go without explanation. That was not mercy. That was confusion. Confusion is dangerous. It invites clarification. Clarification invites finality. I avoided that town afterward. The second-to-last set piece occurred in a hospital. A nurse named Elena had been working double shifts. Short-staffed. She stayed late to cover a gap while her replacement was delayed. She was compassionate. She was exhausted. The handoff log recorded continuous coverage. When the replacement arrived, Elena was not at her station. Her badge still showed her on the floor. Patients reported that she had been checking on them all night. Elena was found alive in a stairwell. She said she had been helping. She never returned to work. Hospitals tightened protocols. They added check-ins. They added redundancies. They also added pressure. Pressure creates violations. The entity does not need many. It needs one per system. I understood then that inevitability was not about scale. It was about time. Given enough time, someone will choose compassion over containment. I stopped thinking about stopping it. I focused on slowing it. That is the only victory available. I wrote letters I would never send. To my wife. To my daughter. To Evan Brooks. I did not apologize. Apologies imply fixability. I explained. Explanation does not undo. But it preserves truth. The entity attempted one last escalation with me. I received a message. Not a call, not a voice, a text. It said you can rest now. Coverage is complete. I did not respond. I placed the phone face down. I waited. Nothing happened. That waiting mattered. The entity cannot finalize what is not engaged. That is the only limitation that still holds. If you are listening to this and you feel the urge to step in so someone else can leave, pause. That pause is resistance. It will feel wrong. It will feel cruel. It is neither. It is containment. I am recording this now because the gaps are closing. Not everywhere, not at once, but enough that avoidance is no longer sufficient. Enough that the pattern is repeating faster than individuals can adapt. This confession is not an attempt to stop anything. It is an attempt to slow recognition long enough for some of you to survive it. I am not hiding anymore. I am stationary. That matters. I chose a place where presence is difficult to assume. No fixed hours. No coverage maps. No expectation of continuity. I will not describe it further. Description creates anchors. I am still careful. I do not reassure. I do not promise. I do not stay so others can go. That rule has become absolute. I want to be precise about what the entity is and is not, without explaining it away. It is not a creature that stalks. It does not hunt in the way people imagine. It does not move through space to reach you. It finalizes decisions. It is activated by the human belief that a mistake can be corrected after it is made. That belief is the doorway. The entity does not break rules. It enforces them in a way we did not intend. Once a rule is knowingly broken, the state that follows is permanent. That is what happened at Station 4. We did not lose Evan Brooks because something attacked him. We lost him because I believed I could fix a violation after it occurred. The moment I stepped away, the state finalized. Everything else followed. I have reviewed hundreds of cases since then, different agencies, different countries, different decades. The variables change. The outcome does not. Someone stays behind. Coverage is assumed. The system records continuity. The person is finalized. Sometimes they vanish. Sometimes they remain physically present, but altered. Sometimes they are functionally replaced by status alone. The harm is not always immediate. That is what makes it dangerous. False stabilization is the most lethal phase. After an incident, there is often a quiet period. Metrics improve. Procedures tighten. Leadership reassures. This is when people relax. This is when compassion returns to the margins. This is when someone says, "I will stay." That sentence is older than any of us. It predates language as we understand it. The entity is older than humanity, but it learned us quickly. It learned that we build rules to protect one another. It learned that we break those rules to protect one another too. It learned that we believe intention matters more than outcome. It exploits that belief. I want to talk about limitation one last time, because it is the only reason I am still alive. The entity cannot act unless a rule is knowingly broken, not accidentally. Not through ignorance. Knowingly. That is why it waits. That is why it pressures through guilt and duty and love. That is why it mimics voices you trust and names you recognize. It does not need to lie convincingly. It only needs you to decide. Once you do, it does not need to act again. The system takes over. I have been asked why this confession is necessary now. The answer is simple. Automation. As systems become more interconnected, assumptions propagate faster than corrections. As staffing becomes leaner, solo coverage becomes normalized. As compassion is strained by exhaustion, people make small allowances. Those allowances accumulate. The entity thrives in accumulation. I have seen it appear in places with no wilderness at all. Call centers. Data farms. Remote classrooms, anywhere presence is logged rather than confirmed. Anywhere absence is treated as an error to be fixed. The most dangerous phrase in modern operations is, "We can adjust later." Later does not exist once a state finalizes. I want you to understand something that will feel cruel. Sometimes letting someone go missing immediately is the only way to prevent something worse. Sometimes admitting absence saves lives. Sometimes shutting a system down is the only containment. This is why administrators resist this truth. Absence creates accountability. Accountability creates fear. Fear creates exposure. Exposure reveals patterns. Patterns reveal the entity. They would rather accept loss than acknowledge it. That is why I was never allowed to finish my guidance memo. That is why records are edited. That is why names disappear quietly. That is why you have not heard about Station 4. This recording exists outside official channels. It will not be archived properly. It will not be referenced in training. It will circulate imperfectly. That imperfection is intentional. Clean narratives are easy for systems to digest. Messy ones resist assimilation. I am not asking you to believe everything I have said. Belief is not required. Recognition is. If you work in any role where coverage matters, remember this. Never assume someone is still there. Never leave someone alone because it is easier. Never reassure someone by saying you will stay. Never believe you can fix a broken rule after the fact. If a rule exists, it exists because someone learned what happens when it is broken. If a rule feels cruel, it is usually because the alternative was worse. If you must choose between compassion and containment, choose containment. It will feel wrong. It will feel like failure. It is neither. It is survival. I have lost my career. I have lost my marriage. I have lost daily contact with my child. I have lost colleagues whose names I still hear on the radio sometimes. I am still here because I stopped trying to correct the record. I stopped trying to be present where I was not needed. I stopped believing that intention could undo outcome. That is the cost. There is no cure. There is no victory. There is only delay. This confession will not stop the entity. It will not expose it fully. It will not prevent future losses. It may slow one decision. It may introduce hesitation, where reassurance would have been easier. That hesitation matters. If you hear a familiar voice telling you that everything is covered, pause. If you feel the urge to stay so someone else can leave, pause. If a system tells you someone is present and your instincts say otherwise, trust the absence. Do not correct it. Do not fill the gap. Let it be visible. Station 4 is still active. It always will be. That is not a mystery. It is a consequence. I am ending this recording now because continuing would only create another assumption. You know enough. Do not try to fix what I have told you. Do not try to contain it yourself. Just remember the rule. Once a rule is knowingly broken, the state that follows cannot be undone. This confession is made too late. That is the final truth.